very much, Mr. Speaker. It's a great honor for me today to be able to rise and introduce this bill and speak to it.
People to take their conversations outside the chamber and into the lobbies. You want to talk? That's where you talk. Doing business here now.
Good point. Well done, Mr. Speaker. Thank you, Mr. Speaker, for that. Thank you. I can tell you that I truly do appreciate how special it is to be able to rise on behalf of my constituents and propose a piece of legislation that will be debated, voted on, and hopefully passed. I just want to talk a little bit about my riding. It's a very large riding, beautiful riding. Takes in the beautiful Qu'Appelle Valley with its many lakes and river, the Big Quill Lakes to the north, and of course a large piece of the city of Regina. When you have a riding like that so diverse, it's often difficult to pick just one item that you want to sponsor in the form of a private member's bill when there's so many different kinds of issues facing the riding. But I decided to tackle something that affects my entire riding, rural and urban alike. Mr. Speaker, for many years, Regina has had the title of the car theft capital of Canada. In many years, per capita, more car thefts have occurred there than in any other city in Canada. Now, thanks to the hard work of the Regina Police Force and city officials, and I should commend our Chief of Police specifically and our Mayor, that rate has begun to come down. But Regina is still victim to an inordinately high number of car thefts every year. Over the past decade, the story is the same all across Canada. Vehicle theft rates have doubled in London and Hamilton, tripled in Regina, and more than quadrupled in Winnipeg. This has resulted in a large increase in rates in Manitoba and Saskatchewan in particular. And from 2000 to 2001, large increases were also reported in Victoria, which was up 55%, and Edmonton, which was up 39%. But it's not just cities, Mr. Speaker. I want to tell honourable members of a small but beautiful farming town called Abernathy. There are just 200 or so people who live in this town and surrounding farms. Yet I was summoned by my constituents from that town to attend a town hall meeting to discuss a crime wave this summer. A town of just 200 people an hour outside of Regina had suffered almost 20 stolen cars in a short period of time. Assuming that every household has at least one vehicle, that is a rate of somewhere between 10 and 20%, which is very shocking. Clearly, this is an issue that needs addressing. Now, my bill does several important things that stakeholders have been calling for years. Firstly, this bill creates a separate and specific criminal offense for stealing a car. Currently, the most likely charge arising from someone stealing a car is being charged with theft of over $5,000. Of course, if a car is stolen that is worth less than that, a lesser charge, along with a lesser sentence, is applied. As the Insurance Bureau of Canada states, it shouldn't matter if it is a luxury vehicle or a 10-year-old sedan. A car theft is a car theft. It shouldn't be more of a crime to steal a car from a rich person than to steal a car from a working-class family. Mr. Speaker, I would venture to guess that the majority of households across Canada own a car that is probably worth less than $5,000, and often that's the car that they use to take children to school, bring elderly parents to appointments, get to work on time, and everything else that we all use our vehicles for. And to have that vehicle stolen, it shouldn't matter if it's a luxury Lexus or a BMW, or if it's a minivan or a 10-year-old sedan. Secondly, my bill establishes minimum sentence for first, second, and subsequent offenses. This is a very important measure and something that I am glad to see our government doing more of. On the first offense, a conviction will result in a fine of not less than $1,000 or to imprisonment for a term of not less than 3 months or to both. On a second offense, to a fine of not less than $5,000 or to imprisonment for a term of not less than 6 months or to both. And on a third offense, third conviction, being charged on an indictable conviction of a fine of not less than $10,000 and to imprisonment to a term of not less than 2 years. Now, why do we need minimum sentences? Right now in Canada, there are too many inconsistencies in sentencing. Repeat and dangerous offenders are getting sentences that are, quite frankly, just too lenient. A study that came out just over a year ago, and which was consistent with previous studies, indicated that the typical auto thief is not somebody out just joyriding. Rather, he is a 27-year-old male addicted to drugs who has 10 prior criminal convictions. Wow. Not charges, but convictions. And he is stealing that crime to commit another crime. This is an important fact to remember. Several studies from police groups, from insurance providers, and others indicate that these cars are being stolen to commit another crime or because of involvement in organized crime. Let's talk about organized crime's involvement in the matter of car thefts. I spoke with the Insurance Bureau of Canada just this very afternoon, and I'd like to share a few of the stats that they told me. Firstly, the rate of recovery has been significantly lower in Canada over the past few years. It used to be that over 90% of stolen cars were recovered by the police. Now that number is falling to closer to 70%. Stolen cars were often used for joyriding. Often young people out at night stealing a car, riding around for a while, and then ditching it. So it was easy for the police to recover the car at the end of the night or the next morning. Or it was being used to commit another crime, most often a break and entry. Speaking to one police officer in Regina, I was told that it was not the luxury cars that were often targeted, but ordinary pickup trucks, as thieves who were breaking into a home needed a way to haul away their loot. So they would steal a pickup truck, drive it to the site of the break and entry, break into the home, steal some property, and drive it away, then ditch the car. So often that car or truck would often be recovered. But nowadays, there's a prevalence in organized crime stealing the cars to be chopped or to be sold overseas. Indeed, I was told today that if your car is stolen anywhere along the St. Lawrence Seaway, you stand about a 30% chance that by the end of the week, your car is on a ship going overseas. There's an interesting number, Mr. Speaker. In 1996, Polish police reported the seizure of 11,000 vehicles from North America, 70% of which were Canadian. So clearly, Mr. Speaker, there's a market overseas for stolen cars that are obtained in Canada. So my bill deals with this. It addresses these repeat offenders, and I think it goes a long way towards addressing the involvement of organized crime. And it contains these escalating penalties. Now, what are the benefits of escalating penalties for an offense? Well, it lets the first-time offender know that the treatment he or she receives from the criminal justice system will only get worse. It encourages them to take seriously some of the alternative measures that are available to them. Because, Mr. Speaker, this kind of activity places a high burden on the Canadian public, not just taxpayers, but also regular car owners who pay premiums. In fact, the Insurance Bureau of Canada states that in higher premiums alone, it's $600 million a year goes to compensate for the loss of stolen vehicles, and it's closer to $1 billion when you take into account all the court time, the police time, some of the investigative resources that are spent. Often it's not the police forces themselves that conduct these investigations, it's actually the insurance providers, the underwriters of the Insurance Bureau, who engage in these investigative activities. The police don't have the resources, so it's the private sector, and that's often recouped by the higher premiums for car owners. Mr. Speaker, as a taxpayer, I believe that money spent on prisons is money well spent. When you look at what governments spend money on, whether it's bureaucratic waste, corporate welfare, nanny-state programs that provide little to no return on taxpayers' investment, and compare that to money spent on locking up dangerous offenders and keeping our streets safe, I think most Canadians would agree with me. Now, many honorable colleagues will tell me that putting more criminals in jail will cost money, and that is true. But like I mentioned, it's money well spent. The question becomes, is there a more cost-effective way to deal with these criminals? Some will say that more money for social programming will have the same effect in reducing crimes for less money and less people facing incarceration. I agree that that may be true for young people or for first-time criminals. But once a criminal steals his third, his fourth, or even his 10th car, they are no longer troubled or at risk. They are a car thief. And as well, one has to consider the substantial savings from the insurance premiums, from the court costs, from the policing costs, as I outlined, that any new money that might have to go into prisons or capacity in jails will largely be offset by those savings. Members should also consider the benefits of the deterrent effect of these tougher sentences. If criminals know that they will be dealt with harshly, they will be less likely to steal cars and therefore won't be charged and won't go to jail. And Mr. Speaker, in 2001, Statistics Canada reported that in the year 2000, the per capita rate of auto theft was 26% higher in Canada than it was in the United States, and that Canada's rate had surpassed the United States level for the previous 5 years. Moreover, police reported rates of motor vehicle theft were higher among Canadian urban centres with populations over 500,000 than among American cities with populations exceeding 5,000. Canada has recently ranked 5th out of 17 countries for the highest rate of auto theft. And I think it's easy to see why, Mr. Speaker. The Americans, many states have very tough penalties. They have a specific offense for the theft of a motor vehicle, and they have correspondingly high sentences for that. And as we can see from these statistics, that has resulted, one of the factors anyway, has resulted in actually a lower rate of car thefts in the U.S. than in Canada. Now, having that lower rate of incidents would save taxpayers money and dramatically increase the personal security of Canadians. I think that's a huge priority for this government, and something that every member of this House will want to work towards. Our government has taken some very real steps towards improving the safety of our streets. We've cracked down on criminals who use guns. We have eliminated house arrest for a large number of criminals, and we have brought in tough 3 strikes legislation for dangerous offenders. My bill follows in this vein. It establishes 3 strikes, guaranteed prison time. I believe all members should find something in this bill to support. Now, in the last Parliament, my colleague from Langley introduced a similar bill. And at the time, the Liberal Parliamentary Secretary for Justice said this. He said, what sort of messaging is being sent when his conviction, meaning an offender, by indictment would have a maximum penalty of 5 years, in other words, cutting the maximum penalty in half. So my honourable colleague felt that the previous version of the bill was flawed because the maximum penalty was only 5 years. Well, I have remedied that situation, and I can inform all honourable members that my bill contains a maximum penalty on indictment for the third or subsequent offence of 10 years. The then Parliamentary Secretary went on to say, the use of mandatory minimum sentences, as found in that bill, could be contrary to the established Canadian sentencing principles, such as proportionality and restraint in the use of imprisonment. Well, Mr. Speaker, I believe that it is too often the restraint in the use of imprisonment by judges that leads to spikes in criminal activity. If repeat offenders were dealt more prison time, they would be out on the streets less and therefore would have less ability to commit crimes. As I mentioned before, the average car thief has 10 prior convictions. As well, my bill contains this mandatory minimum sentence of 2 years only on the third offense. So we're not dealing, I think that fits in with the principle of proportionality, dealing with someone who's already established a pattern of offending. We can look at all kinds of offenses, such as violent assaults or rapes or child molestations, that are being committed by offenders who are either out on probation or who have served their complete sentence because their sentence was too light to begin with. Repeat offenders are better off in jail than in our communities. Once an offender commits a second or a third or a fourth crime, he's declaring himself unfit for life in society and showing his need to be removed. He has forfeited his rights for personal freedom and personal liberty. Now, I am a big believer in rehabilitation. I do believe that many criminals can be saved, or at-risk people can be saved before they commit crimes, with preventative measures like work training, drug and alcohol treatment, and anger management. But at what point does society say, enough is enough, we're not going to subject ourselves to yet another offense by the same person and put that person in jail? Well, I think 3 strikes is a fair proposal. Now, I do want to tell my honourable colleagues that I am open to their suggestions on how to make this bill better. I'm eager to work in a constructive way to get this bill passed, and I'm open to any amendments that will help make that happen. However, the main thrust of the bill, guaranteed prison time for repeat offenders, is crucial. It is Parliament's job to set the parameters for sentencing to the courts. It is within our rights as legislators to instruct the courts on this matter. And Mr. Speaker, I didn't arrive at this conclusion in isolation. I can tell you that many organizations across Canada are asking for this type of legislation. I'd like to read this to you. It's from Rick Dubin, Vice President, Investigations from the Assurance Bureau of Canada. It says, this is a serious, often violent crime, meaning car thefts, that is putting the safety and security of our communities at risk. We desperately need stronger laws to curb auto theft, particularly for the repeat offenders causing so much of the problem. We are delighted to see the member from Regina-Qu'Appelle having taken the initiative on this important public safety issue, and we hope to see his bill passed into law. The Canadian Association of Chiefs of Police passed a resolution specifically asking for a separate criminal offence for vehicle thefts. And they passed a resolution calling on the government to do just that. My bill accomplishes this goal, setting aside a specific offence in the criminal code for theft of a motor vehicle. And as I mentioned, the 3 strikes guaranteed prison time is also a key matter. Mr. Speaker, I would close on this. I would ask all honourable colleagues to go home to their constituents in the 2 break weeks in March. Ask ask a few random constituents, pick a few out of the phone book, call them up and say, do you think someone who has been convicted of their third car theft should be sentenced to at least 2 years in jail? I would predict, Mr. Speaker, that the majority of responses would be, why only 2 years? Well, I offer 2 years as a starting point, as a point of debate. I understand I'm a minority parliament with parties with different priorities. I certainly think higher than 2 years might even be worth, but it would be worth it. But I would ask them, ask your constituents, do you think 2 years for a third conviction of stealing someone's car is too harsh? I would predict that most members will come back here. I'd say all members will come back here with the majority saying it's not enough.